Republican Party's youth movement.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming in this morning.
Thanks,
we appreciate it.
thanks for allowing me in your studio.
Well, you have some serious business that you're attending to over these couple of days. It started yesterday. This legislative hearing into the so-called Neighborhood Recovery Initiative, which some people believe, suspect, could have been a slush fund for Governor Quinn's re-election campaign in 2010. Very close race to the tune of $54 million. Yesterday there was testimony that there were emails among people close to the governor and his re-election campaign staff showing a very great interest in where this money had been going, which would lead one to think, well, they want to get this money out there so that they can buy essentially African-American votes to get Governor Quinn over the top. There is a benign explanation, though, is that the campaign staff is just interested in this in order to highlight what the governor has been trying to do for people in benighted neighborhoods. What do you say to that?
Well, you know, I think this was a major finding yesterday to have these emails turned over. You know, and one of the things that's interesting about them is just the timing of them. Those emails suggest that all these discussions were being held on the campaign end in September of 2010, a month or two before the program was even announced and launched. The program ultimately launched in October of 2010, $50-some million. So these findings yesterday are that, you know, a month or two before the program was even started, Team Quinn was out there trying to politicize it.
Okay, but I mean, I just want to take a bit of a step back and say the idea that a program is initiated or a program is politicized, the idea that politicians will use votes or programs or expansions of programs and look at those through a political prism, this is not novel.
Sure, and fair enough, right? But our job on the Audit Commission is to have a public vetting of this program, and what you look at, if you listen to the auditor yesterday, you know, we've got the independent auditor general who has this scathing audit. And in that audit, what you see is this program was, he called it hastily implemented, that it was thrown together in the fall of 2010. And where yesterday's hearings didn't provide us with the answers to the questions we were asked are on these types of questions. You know, how did the Quinn administration determine which neighborhoods to put these dollars into? All we know is that 23 neighborhoods, all within the city of Chicago, were chosen by someone to receive tens of millions of taxpayer dollars. After all of yesterday's hearings, we still don't know who made those decisions. I mean, you would think those decisions would lead you to make this investment in the most violent neighborhoods of Chicago. But we know that wasn't true.
You had Barbara Shaw, the point person for the program, testify that no one from the governor's office directed her where to spend the money, essentially, where to distribute the funds and to which community groups. Is that credible? Is there contradictory information to that testimony?
Yeah, you know, Barb Shaw, a lifetime of service on these violence prevention initiatives, and she gave an emotional testimony. But on the facts of how decisions were made, I don't think her testimony always stood up to stand next to the audit. The audit said you know, there were all these meetings by senior Quinn officials to do things like approve the neighborhoods who got money and approve the vendors who in those neighborhoods administered those funds. Barb said, well, it wasn't the governor's office who made the decisions, but we've got email after email saying that the governor's office in fact did.
And do you expect that there'll be more evidence forthcoming, more email transmissions that could help to fill in those blanks, help answer some of those questions, or is it just going to be testimony from former or current Quinn officials?
Well, this morning we're going to hear from Jack Lavin, former chief of staff to Pat Quinn, and I think he's an incredibly important witness here. To the extent the governor's office was making these decisions, we had 4 witnesses yesterday who said generally that there were some meetings, quote unquote, but no one would identify who was at the meetings and ultimately who made the decisions out of those meetings. You have to believe that it was either Pat Quinn or his chief of staff, Jack Lavin, who was in those meetings making those decisions. And what you might ask is, what was the methodology to determine where they spent this money and who the beneficiaries of it were?
We're talking with State Senator Jason Barickman of Bloomington about these legislative hearings into this alleged slush fund. I just want you to connect the dots for us neophytes in here into political corruption. Because if you got the governor's office involved in this, let's say, and you're showing they're involved, and they're sending it to places that really don't need it, how does that help his reelection?
Well, remember, our role here is not to tie these dots together on political corruption. I mean, we're not the federal attorneys. There's 2 federal criminal investigations. In fact, yesterday we found out that there were further subpoenas issued by those prosecuting arms of the government. Our job is to vet the program. And on that question, for all of the emotional appeal that in 2010 the state of Illinois needed to make this massive investment in fighting violence because of the violence that was on the streets, you would ask your public officials, if you're going to do that with my taxpayer dollars, make sure you target the most violent communities. Make sure that the not-for-profit who receives the money is the most qualified to deliver the service in the community. And at the end of the day, after you spend these tens of millions of my dollars, show me that it had a meaningful effect on combating violence. We don't have any evidence of any of those questions being asked by the Quinn administration.
And I know this isn't necessarily your place to say, as you just described, but there's an expectation, a lot because of the political discourse surrounding this investigation, that somehow this is going to rise to the level of criminal prosecutions of either the governor or people within his inner circle. Is it too soon to say that? Is that still a possibility? What's your assessment of that?
Well, right, and there's this heightened expectation of this hearing because we had a subpoena of witnesses to get them to show up. But again, to remind everyone, our job isn't to draw a conclusion as to whether a crime was committed. That's not our role. Our role is to vet the program.
We understand, and I understand that you said that, and quite eloquently. What I'm trying to do is connect the dots here, which I'm still having a hard time because my mind isn't so nimble. So the money goes to people that it shouldn't have gone to, but how does that help him get elected in 2010?
Well, yeah, I mean, who makes...
Dan is shaking his head. Just tell me.
Well, I mean, if that's what they were doing, they're giving money to community organizers, political people, to use essentially for political purposes to generate turnout in Democrat constituencies.
So they're going to go and give it as walking around money or something like that? Is that what's going to happen? I mean, you're trying to drive turnout here. I'm trying to figure out how you're driving turnout with this.
Something on that order. And we saw the story about Dorothy Brown's husband. I mean, this is a political figure, and so the question is, are you distributing resources to people that are allies or would be more motivated allies if they were getting resources to make sure that they're focused on turning out the vote in their communities within their circles of influence on election day.
Okay, well there is that.
And what we're asking these officials who are before us is, how did you make these decisions? We've had evidence all summer, these stories that have played out about one Chicago area project, one not-for-profit after another that had some political connection and was the recipient of these dollars. So our questions to the witnesses is, how did you make the decisions?
Right.
Did you evaluate where you sent the money and who got it?
Sure. Well, thanks so much for joining us,
Thank
Senator
you.
Barickman. And how many miles are you going to do today outside?
Hearing's at 9 a.m., so not that many.
A couple more hours of jogging
right.
into the hearing. Thanks so much for coming in.